Let's keep moving on for now, though, and the Democratic governor of Illinois is criticising Donald Trump's plan to send the National Guard into Chicago. J.B. Pritzker is labelling the plans an abuse of power that will cause chaos. But former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel says while the move is unnecessary, Democrats need to show they are serious about crime.
The attack here is also in the area of prosecutions, and the U.S. attorneys' offices across the country should get back to prosecuting gun crimes in cities across the country and states across the country, unlike what's happening in D.C. And Democrats' answer isn't here's the law or this is unprecedented, which is true. We have a strategy for fighting crime. More police on the beat and getting kids, gangs and guns off the street.
The Washington Post reports the Pentagon has come up with a plan to send the National Guard into Chicago as part of the US president's plan to crack down on crime.
Let's go now! Let's go now!
In the US Capitol, this was the response from some at least to the National Guard taking to the streets. A move by Donald Trump to tackle crime that he's described as out of control. And now growing concern and anger that the Republican president is planning the same in another city run by Democrats, this time Chicago.
Chicago's a mess. You have an incompetent mayor, grossly incompetent, and we'll straighten that one up probably next. That'll be our next one after this, and it won't even be tough. And the people in Chicago, Mr. Vice President, are screaming for us to come. They're wearing red hats, just like this one. When we're ready, we'll go ahead and we'll straighten out Chicago, just like we did D.C.
But there, as in Washington, violent crime is actually falling. The sense of emergency certainly wasn't too evident on the streets.
I feel very safe, you know. I mean, it's like lovely, the weather's good.
I've been here for just over a week now and I haven't had any problem.
I don't think that we need military in Chicago, New York, D.C.
The response from the governor of Illinois said it all. There is no emergency that warrants the President of the United States federalizing the Illinois National Guard, deploying the National Guard from other states, or sending active duty military within our own borders. Donald Trump is attempting to manufacture a crisis, politicise Americans who serve in uniform, and continue abusing his power to distract from the pain he's causing working families. And it's a plan described by the city's vilified mayor as uncoordinated, uncalled for and unsound. But none of that will stop the president, intent on showing he'll stop at nothing to clear the streets of crime. Emma Birchley, Sky News.
Well, joining me now to discuss this is former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. Mick, always lovely to see you. Good morning. Your thoughts on this plan? Is it uncalled for?
Holly, it's a tough call. It is. I don't know Chicago like I know Washington, D.C. I live in Washington, D.C. some of the time, and it was really in bad shape, especially some areas of town that were usually good. Areas of town that tourists usually go to were no longer safe. I don't know Chicago nearly as well. I think it is noteworthy that it's not just Chicago. Trump announced this week that he's sending troops into 17 different states. Illinois is one of them. But that's one of 17, and many of those are Republican or red-leaning states. So it's not, I don't think it's fair to say that he's targeting Chicago because he's doing this all over the place. What I think he's trying to do, you saw Rahm Emanuel there. I have a great deal of respect for Rahm Emanuel was the chief of staff to President Obama, mayor of the city of Chicago, and then an ambassador to Japan under the Biden administration. And I think he sort of understands what's happening here, which is that Donald Trump is trying to make crime a political issue and law and order a political issue. And there are some Democrats who think that they should be addressing crime in their cities, including Rahm Emanuel. And there's others like Governor Pritzker who don't. So it's very interesting to watch what Trump is doing politically in addition to practically.
Yeah, absolutely. So you would agree that some states at the moment, as it stands, are weak on crime and potentially weak on police?
I think every major city would benefit from more resources. I think that's the fascinating part about this is there was some polling data, Holly, last week in Washington, D.C. Again, I'm more familiar with Washington than with Chicago. 80% of the residents who were polled didn't like what Trump is doing, but 65% of them thought it lessened crime. Please allow that to sink in. They don't like it, but they know that it's working. I think there's a lot of politics behind that. I think if a Democrat president were doing some of these, the Democrat governors were doing them, people might perceive it differently. Sometimes everything Donald Trump just does is wrong for some people.
Yeah, that's interesting. An interesting point you make. They don't like what Trump is doing, but it's working on crime, which is arguably a very good thing, you would think. Mick, on Ukraine, do you see legitimate progress? I mean, you've got Ukraine saying that it won't give up any of its land, Russia saying a deal won't be made unless it does have some land. It's all a bit of a mess still, to be honest. Is a peace deal likely in your view? How are you viewing it at the moment?
No. I think I can't remember if you and I talked about this last week or if I talked about it with Laura 2 weeks ago, that one of the things I'd be looking for is how quickly the next meeting would take place. Remember, Trump met on a Friday in Alaska with Vladimir Putin, and then met either on a Monday or Tuesday in Washington, D.C. with many of the European leaders. Things were moving very, very quickly. They've now stopped. The Russians show no interest in meeting with Zelensky. Apparently, Zelensky says he wants to meet with the Russians, but under terms that I don't think are going to be acceptable to anybody. So things seem to have ground to a halt, and I think that's a really, really bad sign for the prospects for peace. I think Trump believed when he left Alaska that Putin wanted a deal. I think every passing day probably points out to the President of the United States that the President of Russia does not want a deal. And until you get someone in Russia who wants a deal and someone in Ukraine who wants a deal, then the war is going to continue, because right now we're not at the point where I think a ceasefire or peace talks are going to begin anytime soon.
Mick, what next then? What more could possibly be done if neither side will budge at all? What is the solution here?
Yeah, that's a great question, Holly. Someone has to break the stasis. They have to change the status quo. What does that mean? That might mean dramatically more economic sanctions by the United States, an increase in military aid or the use of the military aid the Ukrainians are already getting, thinking about the permissions to use to go deeper into Russia and so forth. Something to change the current status, because as the way things stand right now, you're not going to get peace. Something has to change. And I think the only way that Donald Trump can change the calculus right now is either economically or militarily.
OK. Mick, I want to get your thoughts. Our Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles is set to travel to the US. How do you see that playing out? Of course, our own Prime Minister has not had a meeting with Donald Trump yet. There are some questions over whether Kevin Rudd is the right person as our ambassador too, after some of those comments that he made about Donald Trump a while back. What do you think about this, the ongoing alliance between the US and Australia currently as it stands?
Holly, I've been doing this probably about 15 years. I got to Washington in 2010 and started working with the Australians back then. I can't think of a time when the relationship it's not bad. Don't get me wrong. It's not in dire straits, but this is the worst that it's been. It's still friendly. We're still on good terms and so forth. But in terms of the highs and the lows, I can't remember a lower time than we're at right now. You mentioned the comments that Kevin Rudd made. That's fine. Everybody knows about that. I actually think the Palestine thing probably weighs just as heavily right now in Washington, D.C. as anything else. Again, not only just doing it, but doing it without giving the State Department, our State Department, any heads up and so forth. The relationship is not great. I'm not worried about it falling apart, and there's still those very, very strong cultural and sort of back channel connections. We're still working on AUKUS, still working on the Quad issues and so forth. But yeah, I think we'd both benefit by having things take a turn for the better here in the next couple of weeks.
It's at a time geopolitically when you want the alliance with the US to be strong, not at its lowest point, as you've just said. Mick, thank you. Always great to see you.